A dusty military base in the middle of nowhere. A decorated colonel with an ego the size of his command stands waiting for an inspection team. Down the ramp of a transport plane walks not a team, but a single woman, a 65-year-old Master Warrant officer who looks more like a librarian than a soldier. The colonel smirks. His officers snicker. They have no idea they're about to meet the most powerful auditor in the entire military, a woman whose quiet authority could end careers with a single encrypted message. This is a story of how arrogance met its match, and how one woman's decade of expertise saved an entire base from disaster. The C-17 transport plane's ramp lowered with a hydraulic groan, releasing a wave of scorching heat into the aircraft's belly. Master Warrant Officer Anna Sharma, at 65 years old, stood for a moment at the top, let her eyes adjust to the bleached afternoon glare bouncing off the cracked tarmac of forward operating base Nightingale. The air tasted of baked dust, diesel exhaust, and something metallic, the perpetual perfume of a place perpetually on edge. Anna cinched the strap of her simple black pack, which held only a data pad and a few personal items, and walked down the ramp with movements that were economical, precise, devoid of the nervous energy that rippled to the handful of younger soldiers disembarking with her. At the bottom of the ramp stood Colonel Marcus Reed, flanked by his ramrod straight aide. The colonel's posture was an announcement in itself. Chest out, chin high, hands clasped behind his back in what might have been parade ground ease if it weren't so obviously performative. He was a man carved from granite and self-regard, his crisply pressed uniform a declaration of defiance against the entropy of the desert around them. His eyes swept over the arriving personnel, cataloging and dismissing, until they landed on Sharma. They lingered for a second on the single subdued crown of her Master Warrant Officer rank insignia, then flicked to her face. His lips, already a thin line, compressed further. "You're the audit team?" Reed's voice was a gravelly baritone accustomed to filling briefing rooms and bending wills. He didn't ask it as a question. It was an accusation. "I am," Sharma said simply. Her voice was calm, pitched just loud enough to be heard over the whining auxiliary power unit of the aircraft behind her. Reed's gaze narrowed. He had been expecting a major, maybe a light colonel, with a gaggle of subordinate officers and NCOs to conduct a pre-deployment readiness inspection, a formal, predictable dance of briefings and checklists. Instead, he got this: a lone woman, a warrant officer whose age was impossible to miss, with silver threading through her dark hair, a face that gave away nothing, and eyes that seemed to see everything. She looked, to his mind, more like a grandmother than a soldier. "Just you," he pressed, a note of incredulity sharpening his tone. "Just me, Colonel." The aide, a young lieutenant named Evans with a fresh haircut and an eagerness to please that bordered on painful, shifted his weight. He mirrored the colonel's disdain with a slightly less practiced version of the same sneer. Reed grunted, the single sound dripping with dismissal. "Well, Master Warrant Officer Sharma," he emphasized her rank as if it were somehow insufficient, "Lieutenant Evans will show you to your quarters. We have a full schedule of briefings prepared for your team." He emphasized the last word, a petty jab at her solitary status. "We run a tight ship here. You'll find all our metrics are green across the board. This should be a quick and painless formality." He turned without waiting for a response, his back a rigid wall of authority. The message was clear. "You are an inconvenience. Do not get in my way." Anna Sharma's hidden past. What Colonel Reed didn't know, what he couldn't have known from her unassuming appearance, was that Anna Sharma had spent 47 years in military service. She had enlisted at 18, fresh out of high school, drawn by a sense of duty and a gift for understanding complex systems that others found incomprehensible. Her early years had been spent in communications and signals intelligence. While her peers focused on climbing the rank ladder, Anna had become obsessed with understanding how military infrastructure truly worked. Not the sanitized versions and manuals, but the messy, interconnected reality of systems under stress. By her 30s, she had transitioned to technical analysis and system evaluation. Her ability to read raw data like others read novels had caught the attention of the Inspector General's office. They recruited her for special assignments, the kind that didn't appear on official records, where she would arrive at bases, quietly observe, and write reports that could end careers or save lives. For the past 15 years, Anna had held Omega-level clearance, a classification so secret that most generals didn't know existed. She had the authority to access any military system, override any commander, and report directly to the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Her Master Warrant officer rank wasn't a ceiling, it was camouflage. It allowed her to move through military installations without drawing attention, to be underestimated, dismissed, and ignored while she did her real work. She had never married, never had children. The military was her family, and her mission was sacred. To find the dangerous gaps between what commanders claimed and what was real, to shine light into the dark corners where pride and incompetence bred disaster. Anna Sharma had seen commanders like Reed before, men who built kingdoms of appearance while the foundations crumbled beneath them. She had ended a dozen careers, saved countless lives, and she had learned long ago that being underestimated was her greatest weapon. Sharma watched Colonel Reed stride toward the command building, a concrete and steel monolith squatting at the center of the base. She felt, rather than saw, another presence nearby. Base Sergeant Major Davies stood near the door of a hangar, ostensibly observing the aircraft offload. He was a lifer, his weathered face a roadmap of deployments, his eyes holding a weary intelligence that came from decades of service. He met Sharma's gaze for a brief second, a flicker of professional curiosity in his expression, before he turned and disappeared into the hangar's shadow. He had seen the exchange between her and the colonel. He was reserving judgment. "Ma'am," Lieutenant Evans said, his voice stiff with barely concealed superiority, "if you'll follow me." He led her away from the flight line, his boots kicking up puffs of fine, talcum-like dust. The FOB was a study in beige and gray, a temporary city built of shipping containers, blast walls, and prefabricated buildings, all slowly being consumed by the desert. Evans pointed out landmarks with the bored air of a tour guide. "That's a consolidated mess hall. MWR 10 is over there. Command and Control, the C2, is the main building." He stopped in front of a drab, windowless container identical to a dozen others. "This is you. The executive washroom is at the end of the row. The colonel's welcome brief for you is at 0800 tomorrow in the main conference room. He expects you to have reviewed the preliminary readiness reports by then. They're on the desk." He gestured inside. The room was a small metal box containing a cot, a small desk, and a single flickering fluorescent light that hummed a dreary, monotonous tune. A thick binder sat on the desk, its cover emblazoned with the base's unit crest and the words, "Operation Enduring Readiness. Pre-inspection brief." "Thank you, Lieutenant," Sharma said, her tone even. Evans hesitated, as if expecting something more, a complaint, a question, a sign of being impressed or intimidated. He got nothing. He gave a curt nod and left, his footsteps receding down the gravel path. Sharma stepped inside. The metal door closed with a hollow clang that sealed out the oppressive heat and sealed in the stale, refrigerated air. She didn't look at the cot or the binder. Instead, she set her pack on the desk and pulled out her data pad, its matte black casing scuffed at the corners from years of hard use. She powered it on, the screen glowing with a soft blue light. She bypassed the local base network entirely, her fingers moving with practice speed across the virtual keyboard, and established a secure, encrypted link to a satellite far overhead, a connection that was hers and hers alone. She wasn't here to review Reed's sanitized reports. She was here to read the base's soul. For the next hour, as dust bled purple and orange across the desert sky, she pulled raw data directly from the base's systems. Not the polished PowerPoint slides and greenlit charts waiting in the binder, but the unvarnished truth. Logs from the vehicle maintenance bays, diagnostic reports from the communications array, duty rosters for the perimeter guards, requisitions from the supply depot. Patterns began to emerge from the sea of data, faint at first, then coalescing into undeniable truths. Maintenance schedules for the long-range sensor towers were being deferred, citing operational tempo. Spare parts for the primary communications server were backordered with no follow-up for 3 months. The night watch rotations were consistently undermanned, with junior soldiers pulling dangerously long shifts. Colonel Reed's ship wasn't tight. It was brittle, a brightly painted facade with cracks spreading beneath the surface. She closed the datapad and finally picked up the binder Reed had left for her. She flipped through the pages, her expression unchanging. Page after page of perfect metrics, flawless reports, glowing self-assessments. It was a work of fiction. She set it aside. Tomorrow at 0800, she would sit in Reed's conference room and listen to his performance. But her real inspection had already begun. The next morning, Sharma arrived at the C2 building 5 minutes early. She wore the same clean but unremarkable uniform, her silver-threaded hair pulled back in a simple bun, her presence quiet and unobtrusive. She found the conference room and took a seat at the far end of the long table, away from the command group already assembling at the front. Colonel Reed stood before a massive screen, conferring with his department heads. Lieutenant Evans hovered at his elbow, holding a laser pointer like a scepter. The room filled with a low murmur of conversation and the smell of strong coffee. Sharma remained silent, her weather hands resting on the data pad in her lap. She observed the dynamics of the room with the keen eye of someone who had done this 1,000 times. Reed was the sun, and his officers were planets held in orbit by the gravity of his ambition and his temper. They laughed a little too loudly at his jokes and agreed a little too quickly with his assessments. Fear, she noted, was a key component of his leadership style. Base Sergeant Major Davies entered and took a seat against the back wall near her. He gave her a slow, deliberate nod of acknowledgement, which she returned. He, too, was an observer, she realized, trapped in the middle, loyal to the institution, but hamstrung by a commander who wouldn't listen. "All right, settle down," Reed boomed, and the room fell silent. "Let's get this show on the road." For the benefit of our guests from higher command, he gestured vaguely in Sharma's direction without making eye contact. "We're going to run through the top-level readiness posture of FOB Nightingale. You'll find, Master Warrant Officer, that we exceed standards in every measurable category." What followed was a masterclass in curated reality. One by one, officers presented slides filled with upward trending graphs and statistics highlighted in green. The maintenance chief reported a 98% operational readiness rate for all vehicles. The communications officer confirmed 100% uptime on all primary and secondary networks. The operations officer detailed flawless execution of all recent training exercises. Sharma listened without interruption. She didn't take notes. She just watched, her gaze steady. She saw the subtle tells, the way the maintenance chief avoided looking at the sergeant major when he mentioned the readiness rate, the slight hesitation from the communications officer before she declared 100% uptime, the way the operations officer glossed over the after-action report from a recent perimeter drill. They were lying, not brazenly perhaps, but through omission, through carefully chosen words, through a collective unspoken agreement to tell the colonel what he wanted to hear. And what he wanted to hear was that he was brilliant, his command was perfect, and this inspection was a waste of his valuable time. When the final presentation concluded, Reed turned his full attention to Sharma, a smug, challenging look on his face. "There you have it. Any questions, Master Warrant Officer?" The room was silent. All eyes were on her. It was her moment to ask about the deferred sensor maintenance, the backordered communications parts, the exhausted guards. It was her moment to challenge the fiction they had so carefully constructed. Sharma looked at Reed, her expression unreadable. "No, Colonel," she said quietly. "You've been very thorough. Thank you for your time." A collective sigh of relief seemed to pass through the room. The officers smiled. Lieutenant Evans looked triumphant. Reed's chest swelled another inch. He had won. The quiet old warrant officer was intimidated, cowed by his flawless presentation. "Excellent," Reed said, clapping his hands together. "Then we can consider this formality concluded. Lieutenant Evans will escort you back to the flight line. There's a transport departing at 1400. I'll be sure to include in my report that your visit was efficient." The coded insult hung in the air. Sharma simply stood. "That won't be necessary, Colonel. My work here isn't finished." Reed's smile faltered. "I beg your pardon? We've given you the complete overview. Everything is in the binder." "I prefer to validate the data myself," Sharma said, her voice still mild but with an underlying firmness that caught the attention of the sergeant major. I'll be conducting a physical inspection of the motor pool, the communications center, and the perimeter sensor arrays this afternoon. A flicker of panic crossed the maintenance chief's face. The communications officer shifted uncomfortably. Reed's face hardened, the mask of bonhomie falling away to reveal the raw arrogance beneath. That is highly irregular. My officers have provided you with their certified reports. Are you questioning the integrity of my command, Master Warrant Officer? The title was a weapon now, each syllable dripping with condescension for her rank and, implicitly, her age. I'm verifying the data in accordance with standard inspection protocols, Colonel, Sharma replied, her gaze unwavering. Section 7, Paragraph 4 of the Joint Readiness Mandate. Physical verification is required, not optional. She had quoted the regulation from memory. Her 65-year-old mind as sharp as ever. The air in the room grew thick and heavy. Reed was being challenged, not on his opinion, but on the black and white text of a directive he was sworn to uphold. He was trapped. He stared at her for a long moment, his jaw tight. Fine, he bit out. Conduct your verification. Lieutenant Evans will accompany you. Ensure the Master Warrant Officer sees whatever she needs to see. He turned his back on her again, a clear sign of dismissal. The meeting was over. As Sharma walked out, BSM Davies fell into step beside her in the hallway. That was a bold play, Master Warrant, he said, his voice a low rumble. It's a job, Sergeant Major, she said simply. He doesn't like his authority questioned. Authority and competence aren't always the same thing. Sharma observed mildly. Davies grunted, a sound of grim agreement. Be careful. The colonel has a long memory for those who embarrass him. I'm not here to embarrass him, Sharma said, stopping and looking at the senior NCO with those penetrating eyes that had seen 4 decades of military service. I'm here to make sure his people don't die because of his pride. Davies met her eyes, and in that moment, a silent understanding passed between them. He had seen the same cracks she had. He was an ally. The afternoon was a slow, deliberate tour of the base's hidden failures. With a reluctant Lieutenant Evans in tow, Sharma moved with methodical purpose, her 65 years of experience guiding every observation. In the motor pool, she didn't look at the gleaming hulls of the trucks lined up for inspection. She got down on her hands and knees, ignoring the surprised looks at the older woman's agility, and crawled underneath them. She ran her weathered fingers over hydraulic lines that were weeping fluid and pointed out hairline fractures in suspension mounts. She had mechanics pull up diagnostic logs on their own terminals, revealing a backlog of critical error codes that had been cleared without being fixed. The maintenance chief, summoned by a panicked Evans, could only stammer excuses about parts and manpower. In the communication center, she ignored the main console and went straight to the server racks. She pointed to a primary server whose fans were screaming with effort, its heat signature visible even to the naked eye. That's your 100% uptime, she asked the young communications officer, who paled. That server has been thermal throttling for 3 weeks. The log showed it's failed over a dozen times, forcing automatic temporary switches to the auxiliary. You've been lucky it hasn't failed during a critical event. Finally, she went to the perimeter. She didn't just look at the sensor towers. She had the technicians open the access panels. Inside, she found what she expected. Dust-clogged filters, frayed coaxial cables, and backup batteries that had long since expired. Lieutenant Evans, who had started the tour with a smug air of superiority toward the elderly warrant officer, was now silent and pale. Everything he had believed to be true was a lie. He was seeing the base not through the colonel's confident pronouncements, but through Sharma's critical, experienced eyes. As they walked back toward the C2 building, the sky was turning a bruised, sickly yellow. The wind began to pick up, whipping sand into their faces. "We should get inside, ma'am," Evans said, his voice tight with newfound nervous respect for the woman he'd dismissed. Sharma looked at the roiling wall of sand on the horizon, then back at the main communications array tower. "The storm isn't the only problem, Lieutenant," she said, her voice grim. "It's just a catalyst." Part 5, The Crisis. Inside the C2, the atmosphere was rapidly deteriorating. What began as a weather alert had escalated into a full-blown crisis. The sandstorm, a monstrous abub, had slammed into the FOB with physical, concussive force. Visibility dropped to 0. But it was the electronic chaos that caused a real panic. Perimeter sensors are offline. Sectors 4, 5, and 6 just went dark. An analyst shouted from his console, "I've got ghost signals all over the board." Another added, his voice strained, "They're not matching any known friendly or enemy signatures." "Primary communications are down," the communications officer yelled, her morning composure completely gone. "I can't get a link to HQ. The server, it's dead. It's not switching to the auxiliary." Colonel Reed stood in the center of the operations floor, his face a mask of fury. "What do you mean it's not switching? Get it back online now." He roared, his voice barely audible over the howl of the wind outside and the rising cacophony of alarms inside. His orders were just noise. He was shouting at results, not problems. His team, trained to report success and suppress failure, had no idea how to react when the entire system collapsed at once. Honest Sharma stood near the entrance, watching the chaos unfold with the calm of someone who had seen it coming. She saw the cascading failures she had predicted play out in real time. The poorly maintained sensors, blinded by the storm, were now being spoofed by an electronic warfare attack hidden within it. The primary communications server, which had been on the verge of death for weeks, had finally succumbed to the strain. BSM Davies moved through the room, his presence a small island of calm. "Check your connections. Work the problem. Talk to each other," he urged in a low, steady voice, but without effective direction from the command element. It was a losing battle. Reed grabbed the radio handset for the base-wide address system. "All personnel, this is the base commander. We are experiencing a temporary technical issue. Maintain your posts." Static answered him. The internal communications were down, too. He slammed the handset down with a curse. He was a king in a castle with no eyes, no ears, and no voice. And that's when honest Sharma began to move. She didn't run. Her steps were deliberate, cutting a path for the panicking technicians with the authority of someone who had spent nearly 5 decades in service. She walked not to the colonel, but to the communications officer's station. The young woman was near tears, frantically typing commands into a dead terminal. "Let me see," Sharma said, her voice quiet but carrying an unmistakable weight of authority. The officer looked up, startled. "Ma'am, it's no use. The central server is—" "I know," Sharma cut her off gently. "It's gone. You were running on borrowed time. Where's the manual patch panel for the tactical network?" The officer pointed a trembling finger to a dusty, forgotten corner of the room. "There, but it's not tied into the main command interface. It's an old analog system." "Good," Sharma said, a faint smile crossing her weathered face. "Analog doesn't crash." She moved to the panel, Evans and Davies following her as if pulled by an invisible string. Reed watched her, his expression a mixture of fury and confusion. "What the hell do you think you're doing, Master Warrant Officer?" he demanded, his voice dripping with contempt for her rank and age. Sharma ignored him. She pulled open the panel, revealing a tangled web of coaxial cables and connectors. Her hands that had been working on military systems since before most of these soldiers were born, moved with a surgeon's precision, disconnecting and rerouting cables. For the next 20 minutes, honest Sharma became the central node of the C2. She gave small, precise technical instructions, rebuilding the base's nervous system piece by piece. She directed technicians to bypass fried circuit boards, redirect power from non-essential systems, and cannibalize parts from redundant equipment. The chaos on the operations floor began to subside, replaced by a tense, focused energy. People were following her lead, not because of her rank, but because her instructions worked. "Ma'am, I've got something," Evans called out. "A repeating signal, low frequency, nested inside the storm's interference. There's a pulse every 3 seconds. It's faint, but it's definitely artificial." "That's their probe," Sharma said, her back still to the room as she rewired another panel. "They're not attacking us with bombs. They're mapping our electronic infrastructure, looking for vulnerabilities. The storm and the sensor ghosts were just cover to get this probe in close." "What do we do?" Evans asked, his voice now stripped of all arrogance. He was asking her, not the colonel. We trick it, Sharma said. We need to make the system look both operational and worthless at the same time. We're going to feed the probe a loop of old, corrupted data. She moved to the main command terminal, the one Colonel Reed had designated as his own. It was dark, locked out by the system crash. Colonel, I need your command authorization codes, she said. Reed, who had been watching this entire spectacle with a mixture of rage and grudging disbelief, seemed to snap back to himself. The idea of handing over his personal command codes to this elderly warrant officer was anathema. Absolutely not, he snarled. That is a gross violation of protocol. Sharma met his gaze. There was no time to argue. You have two choices, Colonel. You can let me fix this, or you can sit here in the dark and wait for whatever is out there to finish tearing your base apart. The room was utterly silent, save for the hum of emergency power and the howl of the storm. Every person on the floor was watching the two of them, a silent referendum on leadership. Sharma didn't wait for his answer. She turned away from him, pulling her own data pad from her pack. She unspooled a single black cable from its side and plugged it directly into an interface port on the command console. What are you doing? Reed demanded, stepping forward. That's a secured terminal. I'm establishing a direct system link, she said, her fingers flying across the surface of her data pad with the speed of someone who had done this countless times. It's faster. On the main screen above them, which had been dark, a single line of text appeared, stark white against the black. Secure system query initiated. Local command authority. M. Reed locked out. External authentication required. Enter credentials. A collective gasp went through the room. The system had locked out the base commander. Reed's face went from red to ashen gray. That's impossible. No one can lock me out of my own C2. Sharma didn't answer. She finished typing on her data pad. On the main screen, new lines of text appeared beneath the prompt. Credentials received. Authenticating. Authentication confirmed. User. A. Sharma. ID 778 IG01. Command. Joint Strategic Command / Inspector General's Office. Technical Analysis Division. Access level. Omega. The silence in the room became absolute, a ringing, profound void. Everyone stared at the screen, their minds struggling to process the information. ID 778 IG01. Inspector General's Office. Not some regional audit team, but the highest investigatory body in the military, the direct instrument of the Joint Chiefs. And the access level, Omega, it was a phantom, a myth whispered about by communications technicians and intelligence analysts, a level of system access that superseded everyone and everything. It was total, untraceable, and absolute. It was the key to the entire kingdom. Lieutenant Evans looked from the screen to Sharma, as if seeing her for the first time. The quiet, 65-year-old warrant officer he had dismissed was a ghost, a top-tier investigator with more system authority than the 4-star general who ran this entire theater of operations. Her rank wasn't a rank. It was camouflage. Colonel Reed staggered back a step, his hands subconsciously going to the eagles on his collar, as if to make sure they were still there. They suddenly felt very small. He had mocked her. He had dismissed her based on her age and rank. He had tried to bully one of the most powerful auditors in the entire military structure. He wasn't just going to get a bad report. He was facing the potential end of his Sharma paid none of them any mind. The screen in front of her lit up, granting her full control of every network system on the base. With a few swift commands, she began to reroute to isolate to heal. She built the honeypot the communications officer couldn't, shunning the enemy probe into a digital cage. She reactivated dormant backup systems, bringing the internal communications back online. She bypassed the fried power converters and restored functionality to the remaining sensor arrays. The operations floor came back to life, but it was a different kind of life. The panic was gone, replaced by a quiet, awestruck efficiency. Probe is contained, the communications officer reported, her voice filled with wonder. It's locked in the honeypot and isn't attempting to break out. Good, Sharma said. Now let's see who sent it. Her fingers danced across the console. She wasn't just defending anymore. She was attacking. She used her Omega-level access to piggyback a trace program onto the probe's own signal. "Tracing the handshake protocol," she murmured. "It's heavily masked, bouncing off 3 different satellites, but the origin signature is non-state. It's a mercenary signals intelligence group, highly sophisticated." On the main screen, a map of the region appeared. A red line snaked out from FOB Nightingale, jumping from point to point until it finally terminated at a location 200 kilometers away, deep in an unpopulated mountain range. "There they are," Sharma said, "transmitting from a mobile platform." She turned to Davies. "Sergeant Major, do we have any aerial assets on standby?" Davies, who had been watching with a look of profound respect, nodded. "2 Reaper drones, ma'am, armed and fueled. But we don't have a communications link to get them a targeting solution." "We do now," Sharma said. She typed another command, and a direct high-bandwidth link to the drone control station snapped into place. "I'm transmitting the coordinates to the pilots. This authorization code will validate the strike order." Colonel Reed, a statue of a man, finally found his voice, though it was a hollowed-out version of his former confident boom. You can't authorize a kinetic strike. You're an inspector." Sharma looked at him, her expression not unkind, but utterly final. "My mandate from Stratcom is to assess and ensure the operational integrity of critical assets. That includes eliminating any immediate threats to that integrity. The threat is there. The asset is here. The order is authorized." She turned back to the screen. "Strike is away." The room was quiet for the final few minutes. They watched a silent text-based feed from the drone pilots. "Reaper 1 on station. Target acquired. Confirming coordinates. Coordinates confirmed. Weapons hot. Hellfire away." A few seconds later, splash. Target destroyed. Secondary explosions confirm mobile comms platform. Enemy probe signal has terminated. A wave of relief washed through the C2. The immediate threat was gone. The storm outside was already beginning to lessen. The crisis was over. Sharma calmly began the process of logging out of the system. She restored command authority to the local network, though she left a flag on Reed's profile that would be reviewed by Stratcom. She severed her direct link, and the main screen returned to its normal display. It was as if she had never been there. She turned around and faced the room. Every eye was on her. The deference was absolute. Colonel Reed looked like a man who had aged 10 years in the last hour. The bluster, the arrogance, the pride, it had all been stripped away, leaving behind a hollowed-out shell. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Sharma's gaze swept over him, then moved to BSM Davies. She gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Your base is secure, Sergeant Major. The rest is up to you." Davies nodded back, his expression grim but resolute. He would handle the fallout. Sharma walked out of the C2, leaving the stunned command team in her wake. "I'm establishing a direct system link," she said, her fingers flying across the surface of her data pad with the speed of someone who had done this countless times. "It's faster." On the main screen above them, which had been dark, a single line of text appeared, stark white against the black. "Secure system query initiated. Local command authority. M. Reed locked out. External authentication required. Enter credentials." A collective gasp went through the room. The system had locked out the base commander. Reed's face went from red to ashen gray. "That's impossible. No one can lock me out of my own C2. Sharma didn't answer. She finished typing on her data pad. On the main screen, new lines of text appeared beneath the prompt. Credentials received. Authenticating. Authentication confirmed. User, A. Sharma. ID 778 IG01. Command, Joint Strategic Command / Inspector General's Office. Technical Analysis Division. Access level, Omega. The silence in the room became absolute, a ringing, profound void. Everyone stared at the screen, their minds struggling to process the information. ID 778, IG01. Inspector General's Office. Not some regional audit team, but the highest investigatory body in the military, the direct instrument of the Joint Chiefs. And the access level, Omega, it was a phantom, a myth whispered about by communications technicians and intelligence analysts, a level of system access that superseded everyone and everything. It was total, untraceable, and absolute. It was the key to the entire kingdom. Lieutenant Evans looked from the screen to Sharma, as if seeing her for the first time. The quiet, 65-year-old Warrant officer he had dismissed was a ghost, a top-tier investigator with more system authority than the 4-star general who ran this entire theater of operations. Her rank wasn't a rank. It was camouflage. Colonel Reed staggered back a step, his hands subconsciously going to the eagles on his collar, as if to make sure they were still there. They suddenly felt very small. He had mocked her. He had dismissed her based on her age and rank. He had tried to bully one of the most powerful auditors in the entire military structure. He wasn't just going to get a bad report. He was facing the potential end of his Sharma paid none of them any mind. The screen in front of her lit up, granting her full control of every network system on the base. With a few swift commands, she began to reroute, to isolate, to heal. She built the honeypot the communications officer couldn't, shunning the enemy probe into a digital cage. She reactivated dormant backup systems, bringing the internal communications back online. She bypassed the fried power converters and restored functionality to the remaining sensor arrays. The operations floor came back to life, but it was a different kind of life. The panic was gone, replaced by a quiet, awestruck efficiency. Probe is contained, the communications officer reported, her voice filled with wonder. It's locked in the honeypot and isn't attempting to break out. Good, Sharma said. Now let's see who sent it. Her fingers danced across the console. She wasn't just defending anymore. She was attacking. She used her Omega-level access to piggyback a trace program onto the probe's own signal. Tracing the handshake protocol, she murmured. It's heavily masked, bouncing off 3 different satellites, but the origin signature is non-state. It's a mercenary signals intelligence group, highly sophisticated. On the main screen, a map of the region appeared. A red line snaked out from FOB Nightingale, jumping from point to point until it finally terminated at a location 200 kilometers away, deep in an unpopulated mountain range. There they are, Sharma said, transmitting from a mobile platform. She turned to Davies. Sergeant Major, do we have any aerial assets on standby? Davies, who had been watching with a look of profound respect, nodded. 2 Reaper drones, ma'am, armed and fueled. But we don't have a communications link to get them a targeting solution. We do now, Sharma said. She typed another command, and a direct high-bandwidth link to the drone control station snapped into place. I'm transmitting the coordinates to the pilots. This authorization code will validate the strike order. Colonel Reed, a statue of a man, finally found his voice, though it was a hollowed-out version of his former confident boom. You can't authorize a kinetic strike. You're an inspector. Sharma looked at him, her expression not unkind, but utterly final. My mandate from Stratcom is to assess and ensure the operational integrity of critical assets. That includes eliminating any immediate threats to that integrity. The threat is there. The asset is here. The order is authorized. She turned back to the screen. Strike is away.